Hello and welcome back to the Sacred Plant Healing Secrets Exposed. I'm your host, John Malanca. Thank you for joining us for episode 4 of our series, Treating Cancer. This is one of the most exciting and revolutionary episodes in our series, and it answers a question that is near and dear to my heart. Does the sacred plant work against cancer? Truly, cancer is threatening to destroy the lives and livelihood of those we love. Cancer is a huge risk for you today. The shocking statistics threaten us all. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will get cancer during their lifetime. In this episode, we're going to show you how to avoid being part of that statistic. We're also going to show you how the sacred plant may be one of the most powerful tools to treat and even beat cancer. Before we dig into this episode, I want to personally thank all of our faithful supporters who have honored us with their kindness and commitment by owning one of our platinum packages. You are now empowered with information to change and potentially save your life and the lives of those you love. With your support, we can continue to spread the message far and wide and help a lot of people. Thank you so much. So let's refresh what we've learned in our last episode. We traveled to Israel to meet Raphael Mechoulam, a world-renowned expert in cannabis for the past 40 years. We learned why Israel is at the forefront of cannabis research and how their federal program was developed. We met children suffering from epilepsy. We saw how the sacred plant provided the miracle that their families were praying for. We met patients with breast cancer and MS who were healing themselves with the sacred plant. And we saw that Patricia Crone was finally able to make the full extract cannabis oil that she desperately seeks to save her life. Now back to today's episode, focusing on how the sacred plant works against cancer. I can attest with all certainty that my father-in-law Stan Rutner would not be here today if it weren't for the sacred plant. There are more and more studies emerging about people like Stan, patients who were given months to live and they made a miraculous, unexplainable recovery after using cannabis. But I also recognize that medicine needs to be evidence-based and that the doctors rely on clinical trials to create that evidence. As we'll show you in this episode, the science is there. This is not purely anecdotal evidence. Some of the science may still be in the animal or laboratory models, but recent clinical trials in humans are backing it up. We will show you some of these amazing and astonishing cases firsthand. You also met Jill, who, like Patricia, is battling stage 4 cancer. We will closely follow both these women's progress until our final episode, and you'll meet more patients who can attest to the amazing effects cannabis has on their cancer. Now the experts will weigh in on the science behind cannabis and its ability to address and aid in cancer reversal.
Our bodies create cancer and our bodies can heal cancer, and that most diseases, like cancer, are diseases of deficiency. So our diet and our lifestyle are deficient in so many vital nutrients from the earth. There are compounds in cannabis, for example, that are anti-cancer compounds that prevent metastasis, that prevent cancer cells from even forming, that trigger cancer cells to die, which is called apoptosis. I didn't know any of that in the beginning, but as I read and researched, I learned a lot. And I realized that I had control over my life, over my choices, and that what I put in my body mattered.
The first study that I'm aware of was in 1974, and it was done at the behest of the Drug Enforcement Agency and the National Institutes of Health, and it was at Virginia Medical School. And the researchers were supposed to look at cannabis and to determine if it caused cancer. And so what the preordained conclusion was, I believe, they wanted to show that cannabis causes cancer. Unfortunately for those that wanted that determination, they didn't get what they wanted, because the researchers at the Virginia Medical School found out that it was effective at either preventing or reversing 3 different types of cancer. So you would think, wow, they just found a natural plant that's effective at treating 3 types of cancer. You would think they would release that to the world and say, hey, we've got a war on cancer. We just found a plant that is effective at 3 different types of cancer to prevent or reverse it. But they didn't. They buried it.
So a couple of the anti-cancer benefits of cannabis are, 1, it's anti-proliferative, which means cannabinoids can stop cancer cells from spreading. It's anti-angiogenic, which means it can block the formation of new blood vessels to a cancer tumor. And it is also pro-apoptotic, which means it can trigger cancer cells to commit suicide, which is normal programmed cell death. Now, I wouldn't call it a cure-all, but I would say, hey, why don't we incorporate that into your healing protocol?
What's great about cannabinoid receptors, particularly the CB1 receptor, is is that it's the most abundant protein in the human brain. So it's lots of targets you can hit. So a brain cancer made of brain cells that express a lot of cannabinoid receptors are going to be great targets to apply those drugs to.
A lot of things happen in cancer cells that aren't normal. Their cell cycle is all going out of whack. They start to express genes that they don't normally. And the CB2 receptor seems to be turned on in a lot of tumors. And now an endocannabinoid signal, or a plant cannabinoid signal, depending, when it acts on these receptors that are being expressed by cancerous cells, it initiates a suicide program. The cell goes into programmed cell death. It becomes a cell death signal in the tumor. How effective it'll be in different states of actual cancer is complex. Cancer is not just one disease. People shouldn't run blindly into it. But the amount of preclinical work, animal work, cell culture work with cancer, and patient stories, compelling patient survival stories, it just paints such a fascinating picture.
Cells of the immune system's job is to determine self from non-self. It's there to say, this is a normal cell, normal cell, normal cell. Oh, this is abnormal, and the body will destroy it it'll rupture the nuclear membrane, the cell will die. And I've heard up to 1 million times a day, the immune system is destroying cells that are proliferating that it doesn't need, and then there's dysplastic cells that are changing in character, destroys those, cancer cells destroys those. Well, when a tumor comes up, that tumor looks like you. The immune system goes, oh, that's part of me. And this thing is growing and growing, well, that's me. But it looks like what the cannabis does is comes in and helps that immune system refocus and go, well, that's not me. I now like to call cannabis a homeostatin because it helps homeostasis at the cellular level. And if the particular cells we're talking about are immunologic, whose job it is to protect the self from growths and tumors, it refines that ability to say, okay, non-self, destroy it, it's gone.
There's no question that the cannabinoids kill cancer cells. And we've seen that in tissue culture, we've seen that in mice. The University of California at San Francisco, through Sean McAllister, has done studies, and they think that they have some specific impacts at the cellular level that they're aware of. I mean, we know that it helps to promote cell death for cancer cells, but to leave healthy cells untouched. It interferes with the ability for the cancer cells to metastasize, and it interferes with vascularization, with blood supply to tumors. I mean, it is incredible the potential that this has in terms of treating cancer.
The difference between a cancer patient and a healthy person is their immune system. Your immune system is what keeps you well. And unfortunately, most of the therapies for cancer destroy your immune system. So most chemotherapy drugs destroy your bone marrow and destroy your immune system, which makes you even more vulnerable. And they also make cancer stem cells more aggressive. And so what you see over and over again with cancer patients is they get these treatments, and yes, the chemotherapy kills the cancer cells in the short term, not all of them, but it kills some of them. But as soon as treatments are over, within a few months' time, the cancer comes raging back, more aggressive than before, and it spreads faster. Cannabis is an example of, and actually has anti-cancer targets in it. So some compounds boost your immune function, some compounds target cancer cells directly. And so cannabis is one example of a compound, along with ginger and ellagic acid in blueberries and catechins in green tea. All of these plant compounds prevent cancer cells from spreading, they prevent cancer from forming, they protect against DNA damage, and they can block the formation of cancer tumor blood vessels too. So this is powerful stuff the world needs to know.
Scientists now understand the mechanism behind the sacred plant's ability to fight off cancer. Extensive lab work has been done at the Ohio State University Medical Center, which gives further light on this topic. Cannabinoids have been a profound effect on tumors when used in studies on mice. We will further explore this and other amazing information on cannabis as an anti-cancer agent. But first, let's meet Jill, a single mother and business owner who's facing a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer.
As is, or would you want to put like a bead on it?
I think just as is. I knew it was something bad. I thought it was cancer. I suspected my pancreas, and went to doctor after doctor and was misdiagnosed. And my internist, she wouldn't give me the scans I needed. I would go to her and I said, I'm having the pain now. I need a scan. I need to know what's going on. And she would look at me and say, Jill, if we give you a scan, we could be causing cancer, not diagnosing it. And handed me a sheet of paper with the name of 8 psychologists on it. I then left and found another doctor, went to his office. I was crying. I said, I need an MRI now. And he got it for me that day, but it was 3 years later. And then I got a call from him the next day. I was in my store. I'll never forget that day. And he told me I needed to come in. He was white. He said he had never seen a diagnosis like this before. Had never had to tell somebody this news. So he just gave me the paper to read it myself. It was in my liver, in my lymph nodes. And they couldn't even tell me how many tumors. It's innumerable tumors. The diagnosis is neuroendocrine pancreatic cancer, which is a rare cancer. Only 5% of pancreatic cancers are neuroendocrine. There's around 10,000 people diagnosed with this disease. Just as a reference, Steve Jobs had neuroendocrine pancreatic cancer. I'm on chemotherapy, having a really hard time with energy, all sorts of nasty side effects from the chemotherapy. And somewhere on the internet, I learned about Dr. William Courtney in California, was making wonderful progress with raw cannabis and juicing. I couldn't achieve it. I couldn't find a way to get it. Of course, it's illegal to grow it. Even if I was willing to break the law to get it, it wouldn't be fresh anymore. So that was almost impossible unless I was willing to move, which is always a possibility. I had the feelers out, and a friend of mine, we had lunch, and he gave me, this is what he found for me, and it was like a Tootsie Roll that one of his friends had brought back from Colorado. It was a piece of candy to beat my stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I didn't think the Tootsie Roll was going to do it. Tried a piece, didn't get any effect. Tried another piece and got a big effect. Had no idea what I was taking because there's no exact ingredients on the candy, which is a big problem. Had a horrible, horrible night. Woke up the next morning, and after a few hours, I felt fine. Actually better than fine as the day progressed, and even the following day, I realized I felt amazing. Amazing. It lasted for about 7 or 8 days. I didn't feel high. I felt normal, and I hate to use that word, but I never felt normal since I've been diagnosed with cancer. Try not to let it define you, but it does. So for 1 week after eating this candy with cannabis, I felt great, and I realized that I had pain every day because all of a sudden, for a week, I had no pain. It was amazing. So I knew I needed to look for the right product for me.
It seems to work in quite a lot of cancers. And people know that it works in animals, it works in, and it is not only the THC which causes the side effects, it's also cannabidiol, also some of the other compounds. There is another compound that we discovered, cannabigerol, and this compound is also anti-cancer. But how many clinical trials have there been with cannabis in cancer? What would you suggest? 0, not a single one. Many of the major companies did some basic work at the beginning, but they never went ahead, probably because they were afraid. That's what I think. They didn't want the stigma, if you wish. I'm frustrated, if you wish. We cannot do that. I mean, an academic lab doesn't have the facilities or the financial backing to do a major clinical trial. It has to be done by a company, or it can be done by a government, or whether it's NIH or somebody else. But there hasn't been a single clinical trial against glioma or any of the others. Why? Your guess is as good as mine.
There are many anecdotal stories about how cannabis works as an anti-cancer agent, and the body of scientific evidence is growing. This research is being done in laboratories, but there have been some clinical trials with humans that show very promising results. The problem is that in order for the medical community to accept cannabis as a medicine, we need to have more clinical trials. The process of doing a clinical trial is very complicated and very expensive. It's especially tricky when it comes to cancer because cancer is not just one disease. The other challenge with cannabis is that it's a plant and not a chemical that can be patented, so the pharmaceutical industry cannot profit from it. Without that motivation for profit, there is little incentive to invest in clinical trials. This is why when it comes to cannabis, most cancer patients don't have the time to wait for clinical trials. Now let's go back to Patricia, who's been diagnosed with terminal cancer and is hoping that using cannabis will allow her to delay her whole brain radiation treatments. Let's see what Patricia uncovers about the anti-cancer properties of the sacred plant when she visits the Ohio State University Medical Center.
Back to square one, two whole brain or not two whole brain. These tumors grow very slowly, but whether they grow more slowly because of the cannabis, well, that's a big issue. I can't tell, he can't tell. 2 months, it's a very short time, maybe it wasn't long enough, who knows. This is the maddening thing about this disease, is that you don't know what to do because you don't know what will happen. You don't know what will happen if you don't accept the irradiation. You don't know what will happen if you do. And they can't really predict anything because we don't have enough information. But in the pathology lab at the Ohio State University Medical Center, a group of scientists working with Professor Ramesh Ganju are busy gathering more information.
So in our lab, we are trying to find out the anti-tumorigenic activity of cannabinoids against breast and lung cancer. We wanted to see if they could be developed to combat cancer. And we are doing some initial work. This is our culture room where we grow our cells and keep them in the incubators. You have any lung cancer cell line or breast cancer?
Either, doesn't matter.
This is a lung cancer cell line. This is the breast cancer cell line. We incubate the cannabinoids with these cells and then look at their growth potential. How do they grow and how do they proliferate? And that way it gives an indication that if they inhibit the growth, that means it's killing the cells. And the next step is animal model. You inject these cancer cells in mice along with the synthetic cannabinoid to look at how the tumors grow in vivo.
Why do we have to put on all these clothes?
We have to put all these clothes to make sure that our mice stay safe. They don't get infected, we don't pass any pathogens.
Very good. Like this?
Yep. And then all your hair goes in?
This is Catherine, who is doing most of the in vivo work, and she can explain you over here actually. Can you take out the mice and show her? Actually, these are the mammary tumors over here. We inject breast cancer cells into mammary glands, and then we can see over here the tumors are growing.
We watch the progression. We measure them regularly. We use external calibers to measure the tumor volume as it progresses. We're looking for the edges of the tumor. We basically do a cross-section. You find the longest length, and you measure that, and that is our longest length. Yes. Then you do the 90-degree angle, and you measure that, and you're able to calculate the volume of these tumors. Get it? So,
very clear.
And this is the cannabinoid-treated mice. So they started with the same tumor size. So the smaller tumor is sitting right there.
God, it's pretty dramatic.
It's a good indication of how the treatment is affecting it. And then we do the 90-degree. They're either shrinking or they're progressing slower compared to their vehicle. There's a big difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a physician, I cannot tell a patient, use marijuana to treat your cancer because we have blocked studies on the use of cannabis for treating cancer. What I can do is to say, there's no question that the cannabinoids are useful in treating your nausea, useful in stimulating your appetite, useful in helping you sleep, useful in dealing with your depression. And oh, by the way, we know that it kills cancer in mice. So if your mice have cancer, give the cannabis to your mice.
It's interesting that if the immune system fails to identify a cancer as a foreign body, and the cannabis or the cannabinoids kind of help it identify that defect. If you stop the cannabinoids, then that tumor can reappear as just normal growth and is acceptable again. I've had patients that have come out from zero tolerance states. One had a pulmonary carcinoma, stage 4, metastasis everywhere, and was eating a lot of raw cannabis, went back to the Mayo Clinic, I think it was in Wisconsin, and metastases were all gone. And they're going like, this, you went out there, and that you're alive is amazing, you know, where the metastases go. But it couldn't grow or have access, and 3 months later was dead from the disease. So for everyone, I consider it a dietary essential. Another one of my young children that had cancer, all she was doing was raw leaf. She was not doing any bud. And she'd been, I think it was a year on a pediatric oncology ward, and I think 39 hours of brain surgery, chemotherapy, 10 times lethal, bone marrow transplant. Tumor grew back. They put her on radiation, general anesthesia every morning, and then radiation for 42 days. At that point, local pediatrician began using raw leaf, said, you know, this is all that's left. And she came home right at the height of vegetative growth, which is like, you know, June, July. And the cannabinoids are really at a peak in the leaf. And she was doing 6 to 8 ounces of juice, which is a lot of cannabis juice. But she's used leaf for the last 2 years, has passed 4 MRIs. The last MRI, there was a comment from the radiologist that with the level of radiation that she received, it would normally take 5 years before that scar tissue would reabsorb. And hers was gone at like 1.5 years to 2. Tumor was gone, scar tissue was gone. For someone who has a deficiency that allows a cancer to get a foothold, it has to be a part of your diet. And with that understanding, it'll support your system's ability to, you know, keep that cancerous cell at bay.
As you can see, there's a lot of scientific research being done on the potential for cannabis to kill cancer cells. Unfortunately, most oncologists are only aware of the palliative effects of cannabis, meaning that they know that cannabis can mitigate the side effects of chemo, but most oncologists are not aware of the research being done on the anti-tumoral effects. In episode 6, we will show you how cancer patients are leading the way, discovering which formulations and dosing strategies are working for them. As we know, there are too many people suffering who do not have the luxury of time. Now that we've shown you the scientific evidence, we want to show the testimonies of cancer patients who achieved dramatic results by using the sacred plant. It's important to note that some of these patients were only able to access cannabis at a very late stage in their illness, while others were able to dose more aggressively upon diagnosis. So each story is somewhat unique in its application and results.
You know, I'm so cautious when I say this, but I personally do believe that a number of the molecules in cannabis have powerful anti-tumor effects, scavenging effects. I mean, the reports are all over the place. And I just had an amazing case. I mean, he was diagnosed having squamous cell carcinoma of throat, positive lymph nodes, ugly scans, biopsy proven multiple places. So he had squamous cell carcinoma infiltrating his neck.
Flipping around the TV, it was probably 10:30 at night or something, and I ended up on the Wealth Channel, and I hear this voice, and it says, "Miracle Cancer Cure." So I turned up the volume and started listening, and it's talking about this CBD. Well, I'd never even heard of this before, so I started making phone calls around and found a dispensary. Started taking it, and but it's starting to go away. The doctor, he can't believe it. He basically said, one thing I know about cancer is it gets hard and it gets big. And it's totally doing different. But by this time, I had also been scheduled for a surgery to go in and find out, you know, what's going on. So I'm in bed in pre-op. The doctor comes in and he looks at me and he feels around my neck. He checks my wristband to see if I'm who I'm supposed to be. And he asked me, he says, and he's very serious. He says, "Are you a twin?" I said, "No, why?" He says, "Because I'm not seeing what I saw before. And if you're fooling with me, I want you out of here." I said, "No, it's me." So they did this running the robot, didn't find anything. I had a PET scan and a C scan and these different things that basically they weren't finding anything. The doctors, because I had told them all along, all the doctors that I've been dealing with, that I've been taking the CBD, they've all said the same thing. We don't know that much about it, but don't stop. If it's working, don't stop. So that's where that's at. So this is the CBD, and this is a number 5, which means that it's the CBD and the THC is balanced. And I do like 5 or 6 squirts in the morning.
Okay.
And at night. Bada bing. I did have some what do you call them, pre-cancer little spots?
Actinic keratosis.
Say that again?
Actinic keratosis.
Okay. I can't say it.
AKs.
Okay.
Also altocockers.
But it was like a spot that never really went away. I would, put different stuff on it, it wouldn't go away, so I thought, well, what the heck? I put the CBD on there. Within 2 days, it was gone. Just gone. So, number 1, I'm a firm believer in it. Number 2, it's something that needs to get out to the world. It needs to get out to the world, because otherwise I would be in chemo right now. I wouldn't be able to speak. All the side effects that go with this are so horrendous, and I feel so bad for anybody who's had or is going through this. To get the word out, get it out. And it will save a lot of people grief. And that's about it.
Are you enjoying today's show so far? Are you learning a lot of great information? Do you want to join our movement and support our mission to inform the world on the truth about cannabis? Then please consider supporting our cause by owning this complete series so you can watch it again and share it with a loved one now or in the future. Your support allows us to continue researching the sacred plant and spreading our findings for free. Also, a portion of each sale gets donated to charities that are helping people every day to find relief for their pain and to live a longer, more vibrant life. So simply click the banner below to join the movement and support our mission. Thanks in advance. It's people like you who are truly helping to change the world.
We see great synergy in combining conventional treatment with cannabis as medicine. When we consult with patients who want to combine, they don't want to choose one over the other. They're a bit afraid to do so. We still see great synergy. Most patients can avoid the side effects of chemotherapy. They, in turn, avoid all the medications they need to take for those side effects of chemotherapy. We see patients get through their chemotherapy treatments quite easily and happily and with good results. So we don't advise people to choose one over the other. We want them to stay in their comfort zone, but we do see a marked improvement when cannabis is combined with chemotherapy.
And when we're looking at, a number of different cannabinoids, THC and CBD seem to work the most efficiently, but not all cancer cells responded the same. Some were very sensitive to cannabinoids, some weren't. And we did find that you could synergistically inhibit the proliferation of some brain cancers cells in Petri dishes. And then following that research, a group in Spain, Manuel Guzman's group, found that if you take these cancer cells that are sort of immune to the anti-tumor effect of cannabinoids and you treat them with a common chemotherapy agent, it will then make those cells susceptible to cannabinoid-induced cell death through apoptosis.
Many different type of cancers. As you know, one cancer is not equivalent to another, and quite a lot of these have been not tested, but people have used them taking very high doses of either THC or CBD or a mixture or an extract, but nothing basic. I mean, somebody says, I take an oil. We don't know what he's taking or what she's taking. This is not the way to do it. I mean, we have to have basic data there. I just cannot believe that any ministries of health here or there or wherever has never initiated anything of this sort, and it's possible.
Now let's meet Brooke and Sarah, whose mother Kay, a beloved midwife, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Sarah and Brooke had to go to great lengths to acquire the cannabis that was helping their mother. We'll talk more about the complex and frustrating regulations around medical cannabis in episode 5.
Well, we were raised very free, and whatever you wanted to do, you could pretty much do. We were homeschooled.
Yeah, totally. Very free-spirited. You know, that's why I think that she was a midwife and had her career in that, just because it was alternative, you know, an alternative medicine, alternative birthing, that sort of thing. I remember when I first found out that she was sick, it was just like all of a sudden out of nowhere. You know, she didn't seem sick at all. And then all of a sudden she told us she had cancer. I remember we went over to her house and she sat us down and said she had stage 4 cancer. And they told her she had like 6 months to live. They told her that. And she had 2, my younger brothers were young, still living at home, you know? And so they said that her options were chemotherapy and radiation and stuff. And she was like, if I were to do that, that would completely wipe me out from being able to take care of these 2 young boys.
And she just said, I need to be by myself and I need to research all of my options.
So when we first started learning about cannabis, you know, I used to hear people say like, oh, medical marijuana, you know, this and that. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, just say you want to smoke pot. You know what I mean? Like, don't act like you really need it for medical use. That's dumb. And then when it was my own mom discovering this miracle plant and then not being able to get it, was like, oh my gosh. Then you're dealing with this thing like, okay, do I start trying to locate drug dealers and risk going to jail? I mean, I was driving around in a car with pounds of weed in the back of it, just like, okay, don't get pulled over. But what's your alternative? Not get it for your own mom? Of course you're going to. And for our family, you know, our whole family's Mormon, so they were very, you know, anti a drug like cannabis. They would feel more comfortable her taking methadone or pills
morphine, whatever it is.
And we're at the house of my grandparents who have been in the church for their whole lives, very, you know, classy, good people, never break the law. And we're smoking it at that point. We didn't even know how to do it any other way. I mean, smoking it in my grandparents' house. It was a big, big deal, you know? And then not knowing how to make it, trying to find little piddly videos online and anything we could try to think of or anything we would hear on, oh, use this, it'll work like that. Wasting, and maybe not wasting, but using so much product to make the wrong amount of things that weren't sitting well in her stomach. It was just, we were just trying to figure it all out. But we were grateful to have that plant in the end because it was, you know, it was a big help for her.
Now let's go back to Jill and hear her dramatic results of what happened after she took some cannabis tinctures alongside her chemo regimen.
I was 7 when I had to tell him. And he was so smart about it that made it even harder because I knew that I had to be honest with him about everything. There was no hiding anything. I think the first year I was not myself. So that was the toughest year for him. I was crying all the time. I was anxious, wasn't focusing on him. I felt guilty that I was doing an injustice to him. You know, I'm sure he feels like, why does this have to happen to me?
There's a charger. Charger?
He ended up having a lot of pain and vomiting and had to go to the hospital. And the cancer was growing. I'm very in tune to my body, and I know the feeling when it's growing, and it was growing again. From my hospital stay, I got really sick. My liver enzymes were through the roof. I had congestive heart failure. My oxygen to my brain was 82%. Lots of fluid in my lungs. They released me from the hospital and I wasn't functioning, eating, speaking. And of course I ended up back in the hospital. Nobody could tell me what went wrong. I truly believe it was the morphine, the opiates, and the medications I was giving in the hospital for the pain that shut down my respiratory system, and then my organs just started following. It was close. I felt like, it was close. We really didn't know what was going to happen. In the meantime, I had the feelers out because of how great I felt from this candy for help from my friends in Colorado and in California. The day I got out of the hospital, there was 2 packages waiting for me. In another package from an amazing woman named Susan, she sent me a little bottle. It was a tincture, very liquidy.
So did you finish your cookbook? You have a lot left to do?
I believe I took the tincture, it was no more than 2 months because I get scans every 3 months. Wasn't doing anything different with my medicines. And I got my scan report back and I had 20% shrinkage of my tumors from this tincture. Not even strong, very weak, 20% shrinkage. My cancer is known to be chemo-resistant, drug-resistant. There is no cure. And I had 20% shrinkage. It was unbelievable. I must have read my scan 1,000 times. I couldn't believe it. I just kept reading it and reading it. One of the best parts about it is my doctor at Sloan Kettering, very conservative, clinical doctor, was blown away. Is a true believer, said she's never seen anything more clinical. Keep doing what you're doing. She couldn't believe it. When I first started to talk to her about what I wanted to do, sort of a hand went up and she couldn't speak about it, and she can't, and it's a shame because she wants to know and wants to help her other patients. So that was the tincture. From there, the next step was to get oils. So I was still working with just this one woman who was doing everything herself, growing it. She made me these oils. I now realize how labor intensive it is to make these oils. And she did it for me in her kitchen. At the same time she was preparing the oils, I had a very visible tumor appear on my neck. And the cancer was growing again elsewhere. And I was gonna have to do radiation immediately. I remember coming out of the hospital and them telling me that we're afraid it is the tumors, they're spreading. I sat down with a very small family, but I sat down with them and I said, I'm gonna be taking these oils and I'm gonna need some help. I'm a single mother of a 10-year-old boy and I need some help. And at that point, my mother got up and stormed away. This has put a big strain on our relationship, whether it's the cancer, the cannabis, who knows, she can't deal with it.
When I decided to use nutrition and natural therapies to get well instead of chemotherapy, all of my support evaporated. Basically, most of the people around me started telling me I was crazy, I was wrong, this was a mistake, that the only therapies that would help me were the ones the doctors had to offer. And it was a really difficult time emotionally because, again, I had no support. You know, most cancer patients, if they're doing conventional therapies, they've got tons of support. Everybody's loving on them and bringing them food and saying, we're praying for you and all this kind of stuff. And man, that was not the case for me. And that's tough. That's tough. And it's something that every person I know who's healed cancer, who went the, you know, the sort of off the rails, right, and took the road less traveled like I did, experienced that same level of rejection and isolation.
I've been grateful to know about it, and now I'm a huge advocate for it, and want to always spread the word of anyone that's sick. I'm like, try cannabis, get a license, try it, because it's definitely where we should be focusing a lot more of our attention when it comes to this sort of a thing. We need to be paying more attention to
Yeah, because there were so many aspects that we didn't know what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, someone said cannabis might help you. Help what? How do you use it? How much do you use? And I think that if she had had access to better research and it was more readily available, that it probably would have been more beneficial.
I was always grateful because, you know, for a long time we couldn't even tell that really she was sick, but I remember watching just that cancer can take over her entire body. Just this beautiful, young, vibrant, awesome lady that just all of a sudden was literally being eaten alive by cancer. But she lived 5 and a half years after they gave her that 6-month diagnosis, and that was just from herbs and cannabis and just how long it took the cancer to actually take her.
Just to be able to continue living life as normally as she possibly could, knowing that she completely was not normal. I think that that was huge for her.
Brooke and Sarah had to confront their religious beliefs in order to help their mother find relief and dignity at the end of her life. It's heartbreaking to see how the stigma of cannabis prevents so many suffering people from using it. Luckily, Sarah and Brooke were able to see past the stigma and witness firsthand the unique healing benefits of the sacred plant. Now let's go back to Jill as she visits with Dr. Eden Fromberg, who is amazed by Jill's results using cannabis.
It's from September. This is my latest scan report.
What kind of scans are you getting?
MRIs and sometimes CTs of the lungs. Just check out my lungs.
So you have metastases where that you know of?
So it's pancreas to the liver and the lymphs. It's everywhere.
Okay. So what are you seeing shrinking then on the imaging?
So on the imaging, after I started the tincture, there was shrinkage, not in the primary, which is the pancreas, but in the metastasis in the liver and lymphs. As a matter of fact, some of the lymphs were not enlarged at all anymore, and they're not even on my scans because they can't, if, you know, it could be there, it could not be there, but they're so small that they can't see that anymore.
I want to clarify that you're weaving your cannabis oil with chemo and or radiation?
With chemo. So I take oral chemos, and I've been taking them for 3 years. The other thing you should know is I did switch to oils, and at the same time, there was a tumor sticking out of my neck that you can see. 2 weeks of taking the oils, this was gone. You couldn't see it. I came for my next appointment with the doctor to discuss, this is all emergency mode now, to get my next treatment. She walked in the door, and I was sitting on my table. I walked in the door, my hair was pulled back, and she looked at my neck and just went, and was really confused and looked at me.
It was supposed to be there.
Of course.
Right.
It was confirmed. It was a tumor. And she looked at my neck and she came over and she touched it and said, "What happened?" And I said, "I've been taking cannabis oils, the oil." And she was silent.
With what you're telling me, it seems that, you know, we really need to get the word out about how wonderful this is, because it's made such a difference for you. And even the current law in New York State, this is really just about making you feel better. It's not about making the cancer go away according to the law.
That's a shame.
It's a shame. Because unless somebody is suffering to a certain extent, the law really won't allow this.
From the first day I took the tincture, I have not had any pain medicine since.
Let me clarify.
Cannabis.
You were taking opiates, narcotics, benzodiazepines like Ativan, anti-anxiety drugs, Tylenol. It sounds like a whole pharmacy of things that have toxic side effects, affect the liver, recalibrate all your physiology, your brain, and you were able to put that aside and just use this cannabis tincture.
I was.
As a doctor, I think this is amazing.
My doctor was pretty blown away as well. And the next time I went to the hospital, the cancer was growing again, and I refused all pain meds. They were not happy with me in the hospital for refusing pain meds.
Isn't it up to you whether you get
It
experience?
is. I treated myself in the hospital, and I was fine.
We'll continue to follow Jill to see if she's able to access the sacred plant in her home state of New York. Now let's meet Andrew, another cancer patient who has an incredible story to share about how cannabis helped his recovery.
Well, my name's Andrew, and I was diagnosed with an anaplastic astrocytoma, or a grade 3 glioma, back in November of 2011. I was having these seizures and at the time didn't realize they were seizures. And I'm perfectly healthy. It's most likely anxiety, which is something that I, had dealt with from the time I was a kid. On my way home from the MRI, I got a call, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Stocker, we need you to come back right away," or it was either that or "We need you to go to the emergency room right away." And he said, "There's a very large lemon or larger sized tumor in your right parietal lobe." I had a craniotomy where they removed 99% of the tumor in an 11-hour surgery. After that, I had a 4-week break, got to recoup and then have high-dose radiation and chemotherapy, and then 6 months of high-dose chemotherapy afterwards. The surgery, alligator bite. So there's 3 titanium screws, bolts, and the radiation resulted in this permanent off-balance bald patch. And the chemo knocked out most of my hair here, which probably wouldn't have grown back anyway. But, so I wear a hat most times, but I used to wear a hat all the time anyway, so it's fine with me. When I asked the doctor about my prognosis and how much time I have left, the doctor was, suggesting that I don't look at the internet, that I don't focus on statistics. You'll scare yourself to death. You'll be riddled with anxiety. And that's not because I had an anxiety problem. That's because, if you do look at the internet and you do believe these statistics, they're pretty grim. So I was told that, it's not likely that this chemotherapy is going to be extremely effective. Hopefully it will be. You've most likely, got between 1 and 3 years before you see a recurrence, possibly 3 to 5. 5 years, we'll look at you as a long-term survivor. That's hard to accept, and especially when they say this is an incurable cancer, this is inevitably how you will die. This is, unless something unexpected happens and you, as one of the talk therapists put it, unless you get hit by a bus, this is most likely, this is how you're going to die. I'm like, I found the humor in that, but I was like, man, that's not good analogy. I'm not going to get hit by a bus. I know how to stay out of the way. I can control that. I can't control this, my cancer. I want to be able to control my cancer. I want to be able to use all the tools that I can to help in any way possible. And so, I invested in a vaporizer for cannabis. And I remember coming out of the room after having a little vaporizing session, and my mom saying, "Holy cow, the difference is amazing." And, this was unsolicited. She just was like, "What are you doing in there? This stuff really works because you're hungry, you're smiling, your sense of humor's back. You look like you feel good. You sound like you feel good." And I did. I felt fine. I went down and worked out at the gym, at the place that I was staying. And so right then and there, that was kind of when I questioned, why couldn't there be an anti-cancer treatment, chemotherapy or some other one, hopefully, that's a lot less damaging to healthy cells.
I'll take Mickey.
So I'm coming up on 5 years without any recurrence. I'm understanding this is what they call long-term survival. The doctor is extremely excited about the fact that she hasn't seen any recurrence yet. She tells me to keep doing whatever it is that I'm doing. And I make sure I let her know that in addition to everything that my integrative oncologist has suggested that I do, that I have been using cannabis daily from the time that radiation and chemo treatment started until now. And, she being my neuro-oncologist is not willing to say anything more than, well, okay, that's great. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Andrew credits his combination of cannabinoids, an anti-inflammatory diet, and advice from his integrative oncologist for helping him through his punishing treatments. With Andrew's type of brain cancer, only 27% of patients live up to 5 years. Andrew has passed that 5-year mark, and he continues to take a maintenance dose of cannabis to prevent any recurrence. In episode 7, we will check in with many of the patients you've met in this series to show how they're continuing to keep cancer at bay. So I hope you come away with this episode with a better understanding of how cannabis works against cancer. You heard about the scientific studies that explain how cannabis gives your immune system back the ability to recognize cancer cells and program them for cell death. You saw this phenomenon at the Ohio State University Medical Center, where the cancerous tumors in mice shrank enormously after cannabinoid treatment. You also met Jill, a stage 4 cancer patient who experienced 20% shrinkage in her tumors after taking cannabis oil, even having a large tumor disappear from her neck. You also met Don, who had a similar experience. It is clear that all cancer patients should have access to cannabis and be educated about how to use it. Coming up in the next episode, we'll be meeting some of the people who are making medical cannabis preparations for patients. You will see how the raw plant is turned into medicinal oils and tinctures and which formulations work best for certain conditions. We'll show you how your access to medical cannabis is being threatened and show you the lengths that some people have gone to legally access it. Jill will show us the dosing techniques she developed to better tolerate the medicine, and we'll find out if the cannabis oil is helping slow the spread of Patricia's cancer. Episode 5 is going to be a pivotal one, so make sure you don't miss it. Thank you again for joining us for episode 4, and a special thank you to those who generously supported our mission to spread this message far and wide. God bless you and your loved ones. I invite you to join our movement, support our mission, and help us save lives. We're a small company that's committed to the truth and to helping humanity. Since we don't have the unlimited resources that Big Pharma has, we need to work together to educate and empower more people about the healing benefits of the sacred plant. When you support our mission by owning the complete series today, you allow us to continue research, interview, expose, and share this knowledge with the world for free. If you learned something, been inspired, want to watch it again, share it with a loved one, or just love how it feels to support a good cause, consider owning the sacred plant, Healing Secrets Exposed today. Simply click the banner below to join the movement and support our mission. Thank you in advance. It's people like you who are truly helping to change the world.